Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Penna Dexter. I'm sitting in Kirby's seat today as he is still in Alaska. He's visited some of our stations up there, and Dr. Merrill Matthews is also in studio. Lathan Watts will be joining us in a couple of segments. And I thought you and I, Dr. Matthews, could handle the aftermath of what went on in Texas. And we both froze. We both survived.
We both froze and survived.
And gratefully, and I know that you've written on it. Of course, there are lots of comments, lots of analyses, and we still don't have the full picture of what happened and why people lost power in such great numbers and for so many days. But we will be hearing from Matt Shaheen, who is a state legislator in Texas, to talk about what the legislature is going to be doing. They've already had a session yesterday. What came out of that? And so we'll talk with him. But I wanted to talk with you. You've written on it, and of course the left has blamed it on global warming, which is crazy. It was so cold. That's just kind of unfortunate.
Remember when global warming was about the Earth getting warmer, not colder?
Yeah, I know. So you've written on it, and you've said not all cold temperatures are due to climate change.
Right. And what I did was, and I didn't know this, I went and looked at the at the National Weather Service, and I just put in something along the lines of coldest weather in Texas or something, and lo and behold, the National Weather Service has a list of the coldest temperatures and recorded temperatures in Texas in 17 of the largest cities, and it goes back to 1899. And when I looked at this, I thought, my goodness, I mean, in Dallas, we hit -2 degrees on night of the morning of the 16th, I think. But the coldest recorded temperature in Dallas was -8 degrees in 1899. And the National Weather Service actually has a discussion about what he thinks probably was the coldest night in Texas, where temperatures in various parts of the state were down to -23. It said unofficial temperatures were down to -30. That Galveston Bay apparently froze over. And that year that we're talking about was 1933.
It's called global warming.
It's called global warming. But and the point I tried to make is you can make the case that climate change is affecting the weather and perhaps creating more severe responses. You can make, even though hurricanes and a number of things are down, you can try to make that case. But just because Texas got really cold one time doesn't mean it doesn't happen here. It's not usual. It's rare, but it does happen. And in years past, it happened even more and in more times. In fact, of those 17, only four of the dates actually were after 1950. So of the 17 cities with the coldest temperatures, 13 of them came prior to 1950. So it's the notion that this cold weather is a response is something due to climate change. You just can't make that. You just can't make that connection. But Penna, I listen to an NPR person asking Mr. Magnus, I believe, is the head of the ERCOT, Electricity Reliable Council of Texas. And after he finished the interview, he asked, do you think this is global warming? As if a guy who manages an energy grid has any sense about, is this global warming or not? I heard NPR interview a climate scientist.
How did he answer?
He just sort of, I don't know, and he moved on.
Yeah.
I heard them interview a climate scientist, I think, from Georgia, I think on Tuesday when we were hitting that coldest weather. And this guy was so interesting because the anchor asked him, do you think this is caused by global warming? He said, well, let me just remind you, it is February, and it gets very cold in February. And he went on to explain how these things are not unusual.
The word climate change, I mean, it's due to climate change. Well, in a way, you can't answer that in the negative because the climate changes. They've adopted that term. And it's not very descriptive, really.
And see, I would come close to saying they've become obsessed with the term, because I couldn't read any major media outlet that I looked at all addressed the issue of climate change. In fact, an Associated Press article about this implied that the reason Texas wasn't winterized is because Texans deny climate change.
Okay.
And then she went on to quote a professor, I think, from California, and made the case that since California believes in climate change, their electricity grid is much more established and ready to handle the needs. And I sit there saying, do you know anything about what happens in California? I mean, in Texas, power outages are very rare. In California, especially in the summer, it's kind of the standard practice. Mm-hmm. I mean, we see this past summer, we saw power outages all over the state for a range of different reasons. Wildfires, they didn't improve and invest in the electricity lines and so forth. So a tree can hit them, fall over, and there's just a number of problems there in California. Plus, they've really expanded onto renewable energy, and that doesn't always, wind doesn't always blow, and sun doesn't always shine.
What I've been reading in the weeks since we warmed up a little bit is that we didn't winterize, and especially a lot of the wind and solar that we've got as part of our energy mix weren't winterized. But there's a calculation to be made, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but that the winterizing is very, very expensive, and so there was a little bit left to chance, because where we need the most help and shoring up of our grid is in the summer months, because that's much more common. So to have this event, there were some bad decisions made along the way to react to it. But, do you think, in the way you've looked at it, that the best decisions possible were made, or were there some bad ones? And secondly, is it worth it to spend the money to winterize?
From what we understand right now, the legislature is really serious about not making winterizing a voluntary thing. They had recommended that, but they're going to try to make it mandatory. That's probably going to cost some money. I suspect it costs more money doing it after the fact than rather before the fact. But in listening to some of the people talk about this, they said, up in the far north, they'll take their power generating and they put them inside buildings, so it protects them from some of the wind and cold. Whereas our problem isn't being protected from the cold. Typically, it's being protected from the heat. And so they leave the power generating plants outside so that heat can disperse more and so forth. So it's we'll have to see how they do that. You want to be careful about making very expensive policies based upon one sort of unusual situation. On the other hand, every politician I hear, they don't want this to happen again, and they sort of learned their lesson on this, and they want to make sure. We'll see if they end up doing it right, but they want to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Well, next up, we're going to talk with Matt Shaheen, who is a state representative, and he, full disclosure, he's actually my state representative, and so I got notes from him during the whole week. He would update people. He let people know where they could go to get help. And, I'll talk about another story about him when he joins us. But they're having to deal with this now. Our legislature has got to make some decisions going forward about some of the issues we just discussed and others. And also, what about those who made the decisions on reacting to the cold and reacting to the inability for people to get heat to their homes and their businesses. So we'll get some more information. We'll find out what is coming up. We happen to be in a legislative session, so they'll act on this, and we'll talk about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the framed pictures in my office is a photograph I took at Glacier National Park when I was a teenager. I've always wanted to go back and photograph this beautiful place with a better camera. Also wanted to go back so I could take a picture of the signs that the Park Service put up predicting that all the glaciers would be gone by 2020 due to climate change. In case you don't know, there's still glaciers at Glacier National Park. Yes, some have shrunk, but they certainly have not disappeared as predicted. Kyle Smith used this as one example of the problem with making specific predictions. Saying that sometime in this century we'll have an environmental disaster is much safer than saying it will happen in the next 10 years. He also provides some background to the story of glaciers in this park. The U.S. Geological Survey has been keeping track of the retreat of glaciers in Glacier National Park for some time. The scientists noted that the mean annual temperature has increased, so the glaciers will be gone someday in the next few decades. So that had Smith starting to look at past predictions. For example, a 1923 Associated Press report said glaciers would almost disappear in 25 years. That means they should have been gone by 1948. But there's a 1936 article that predicted that the glaciers would vanish within 25 years, so they should have been gone by 1961. And there's a 1952 AP report that explains that naturalists say that glaciers would be gone in 50 years, so we should have had no glaciers by 2002. By now, I think you can get the idea. All of these past predictions were wrong, but that did not stop others from making other predictions. Someday the glaciers may be gone, but they haven't left yet. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Dr. Merrill Matthews is in studio with me from Institute for Policy Innovation. We were just talking about his article on quote-unquote global warming. Global warming caused the cold snap of last week. That's what some people on the left happen to think. So we kind of debunked that, and the article that debunks it is at pointofview.net, and you click through on Buddy Matthews' picture. Institute for Policy Innovation is the first article there. Also in studio now is Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And Lathan, I'm glad you're here, and I know you're just getting ready, but I want to also bring into the conversation our guest, this segment, Matt Shaheen, and he is state representative. Actually, full disclosure, he represents my district, District 66, which is sort of West Plano and far north Dallas. And before that, he was on the Collin County Commissioner's Court. And he's an active, and I think the type of legislator you really want in times like these. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Penna, thanks for having me on.
I know you had a busy week last week because I got communications from you in the middle of the cold weather, offering places for people to get help, offering explanations. And I think the first thing I just want to ask you, and Lathan and Merrill Matthews are also going to participate in asking you questions. We're going to try to get as much information as we can. But what took place in the meeting yesterday among state legislators?
Yeah, so two House committees got together and convened yesterday, and we're continuing our work today, the State Affairs Committee and Energy Resources Committee, and we called witnesses from utility industry. When you say utility industry, you got to look at the power plant generators, the distributors that move the electricity from the plants to our homes. And we also had the regulatory bodies, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, ERCOT, which is our entity that manages the entire Texas grid. So we had over 15 hours of testimony, and really just gave us a behind-the-scenes look at what went wrong. We're looking to hold individuals accountable for what was a catastrophic event last week. I mean, there was citizens that had lost 3 to 4 days of power. So we're in the investigation mode currently, and we'll soon be moving into the solution creation mode.
Representative Shaheen, this is Merrill Matthews. So when the crisis started happening, there was a lot of initial finger pointing and blame casting, and people saying this person did or this organization did it, they're responsible for it. Somebody else said no, we aren't responsible. Did you come away with a little more clarity? Because it's been hard, I think, for us to, for instance, when ERCOT is criticized, and ERCOT comes up and says, well, look, we're just managing the flow of energy. We're the traffic cops. We don't provide energy. We don't create those things. And so we, as you see sort of the back and forth there, it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to sort of get a sense is where did something go wrong, and is there a way to fix that problem reasonably? And did you get a little bit of a sense as to where that I don't want to say fault, but where the problem lies, and some kind of plan for the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, right? There was, without a doubt, a lot of finger pointing. You got people with different political agendas going to social media and already coming up with solutions when we're right middle of a crisis. And unfortunately, the process that the legislature is going through right now, I know looks like it's finger pointing. And maybe some people are still doing that kind of thing, but we really need to go through a process to investigate what happened. And so here's what we know right now is the power companies in the state of Texas did not do a sufficient job with putting together plans in case of catastrophic weather events, whether it's hot, cold, hurricanes, and even non-weather related items like, pandemics and those types of things. They didn't have sufficient plans in place. They acknowledged that. And so one of the things that they're going to do better is they're going to engage a lot of the third parties that they depend on. So, for example, you have a power plant on a lake out in East Texas. Well, they need natural gas, to power the heating units that turn the turbines. Well, the gas got cut off by another electrical company, or there was parts of the pipeline that were frozen, and so they didn't take they being the power generation company didn't take into consideration these third parties that they rely on to ensure that during a catastrophic event that gas could flow. Communications were horrific. The citizens of Texas were not communicated to in an effective manner. Quite frankly, they were being told early in the week that there were going to be rolling outages that you should experience for anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. Texans ended up being without power for days, and that created some incredibly dangerous situations, and unfortunately, there were some lives lost. So lots of areas where we identified some issues, and we're starting the process now to take corrective action.
Lathan?
Yeah, I was curious as to if you heard from ERCOT or any of the providers, I guess. Sort of, it seems like from the outside looking in, we didn't learn a whole lot from the winter storm we had about 10 years ago. And we went through a similar version of this about a decade ago. And what, if any, measures were put in place in the meantime that either didn't work or could have worked better, or did we just not learn the lesson of the last big cold storm that we had?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one thing to keep in mind is there were definitely steps taken after the 2011 snowstorm. The one thing to keep in mind is back in 2011, there were parts of Texas that were experiencing the Arctic cold. this weather event last week was literally all 254 counties. But yeah, so some of the changes that were made after 2011, there was a bill passed that actually mandated that these emergency plans would be put in place. They're specifically called emergency operation plans. And the Public Utility Commission, it was their responsibility to then, in their rulemaking authority, take that to the next step and actually go into detail as far as what need to be made up with those plans and those types of things. And for the most part, that was all carried out. The problem was these emergency operation plans, right? Again, these are the disaster recovery plans that the utilities were supposed to have in place and that they would execute in case of a catastrophic event, weather event, what have you. And then just the execution of that was just poorly done. And to compound that, ERCOT's responsibility, and again, ERCOT's the entity that manages the Texas grid, their responsibility was to review those plans. They did review the plans, and they essentially signed off on them. They said they did an audit, and they were sufficient, and they clearly weren't. So there was really a regulatory failure, as well as utility companies just didn't create sufficient operating plans. So we're literally in the middle of looking at that. So there's some continued corrections that we're going to have to make. But we're even looking at things like, do we restructure the regulatory bodies in the state of Texas? Right now, natural gas, for example, is regulated by what's called the Railroad Commission. Utilities are regulated by what's called the Public Utility Commission. Do we combine those, right? ERCOT that manages the grid, do we need to restructure them? So all of that's on the table because, quite frankly, Texans are angry, and they should be. And we're going to make adjustments so that widespread outages don't happen again in the state of Texas.
Representative, we don't have a lot of time left, but there was a lot of criticism of Texas having implemented essentially what they're calling a free market system in this. And Mitchell Schnurman of the Dallas Morning News had an article last week where he says, actually, there's a good case to be made for this. Generation has increased significantly. Texas prices, electricity prices tend to be lower than national. We've created more capacity than most of the other states, and so he made a case that it's actually worked fairly well for Texas. Just quickly, your response on the free market approach that we've tried here.
Yeah, there was a article in the Wall Street Journal that was inaccurate. It essentially said, yeah, Texas headed down this path of deregulation, free market, and the benefits just weren't there. That article was debunked. It was actually debunked yesterday during our committee hearing. The reality is Texans have more choice of who their electrical provider is than most any other state. You can go to a website called Power to Choose and choose your electrical utility. You can base it on price. If you're an individual that wants cleaner air, you're really focused on the environment, you can choose a company that tends to be more green in nature as far as their sources of energy. So you have more choice. We're in the bottom third as far as cost of electricity in the state of Texas.
Well, Matt, thank you. I'm glad you debunked the article. It was, it had me kind of confused. But we will have you back as this process goes on. Thank you so much. You've really provided a lot of information we needed. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon. And we'll be right back.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back. We have lots of questions as Texas as to what happened last week and what can be done to prevent such an occurrence again, and what's wise to do, what's cost effective to do. Sometimes we have to spend more money to protect things. Other times you just have to kind of take your chances. And it was good to hear from Matt Shaheen. We will keep him in the loop as the legislature is meeting right now. This is our legislative session here in Texas, so that we can see what is going on. Mm-hmm. I think he's a good person to be able to keep us up to date on that. And I just wanted to mention one thing about him, because my dad lives in a senior community that's healthy seniors, and they lost their power right away and for several days. And so the people were freezing cold, of course. He doesn't walk well, so I couldn't get him down the stairs unless we carried him, and he wouldn't let us do that. So he wanted to stay. So there was no way to get him to my house until they finally started getting an hour or two of power, and you get him down the elevator, and I got him out to my house. Matt was on that case in that particular place, probably other senior places too. They love him there. They worship him because he got their power back. And he made sure that, some individuals that were really having trouble got help. And so, it's sort of a contrast with certain lawmakers who don't help their constituents or don't see that responsibility to be in solidarity in a disaster like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was. And so I appreciated that. But I have been hearing both Dr. Matthews and Lathan Watts' stories. My home was left just unscathed, except for some plants died. But Lathan, I think you had the I guess the most dramatic wilderness experience.
Yeah, we were without power for about 3 days. It came on for about 20 minutes and then went off, and it was just out, for about 3 days. And knowing that the storm was coming, I had bought some firewood. I have a small wood burning fireplace in the living room, thinking that might be a good way to supplement the heat, so I wouldn't have to have the heat turned up as high. But once that became the sole source of heat, we burned through that wood pretty quickly. So you can probably tell by listening, I'm a bit of a country boy, and grew up out in the sticks in northeast Arkansas. And luckily for me, my house backs up to a green belt. And so once I ran out of the wood that I had purchased, during the day, I would go out, and I should say, just in case anybody from the city of Louisville is listening, I went out and I cut wood, basically. And then would dry it out during the day, and it would burn overnight to kind of keep as much heat as I could. What I was cutting, though, was
your property?
My property, yeah. It was, we have a pretty large pin oak in our backyard, and over many years I've had to trim limbs out of it. And so I had drug them and had a pretty decent brush pile on the back corner of
Very
my property.
resourceful.
So it's not really why, but it came in very handy. So I went out there and cut up as much as I could during the day, during the warmest part of the day, when it was up in the teens, and then would bring it in to dry it out and burn it overnight. So
crazy.
I got to embrace my inner Jeremiah Johnson.
That's great. And, Buddy, you had a few problems that you seem to weather also.
Ours was small. We had the rolling blackouts, though not as bad as some. The power would be on for 2 or 3 hours, then off for 7, 8 hours or something like that. So we actually got pretty good at power's on. Okay, go plug in your phones, plug in your iPad, get everything charged up, get the microwave charging, and get whatever you can done. And then you... the one thing I wouldn't do is raise the garage door. People say, why don't you just get the garage door? Well, the garage door is electric. And you can unhook it and you can pick them up. But if it's fairly heavy door, it's hard to get those things up. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to be outside shoveling the driveway or something and have the power go off and now the garage door is open. So anyway, it worked fairly well for us. And I've just been the kind of struggles that so many people have seen with water breaking and just flooding their houses, coming down from the ceilings, and there are several houses in our neighborhood that this happened to. It's tragic on some of these things, and it's just very, very expensive. And of course, the notion is that this may be the most expensive insurance event that we've had in Texas. So it's been tragic for a lot of people, and the notion that you're coming out of 3 or 4 days and then now of power outages or rolling out blackouts, and now you've got all this water damage that you've got to struggle through for a good while because all the businesses are covered up. They can't get to you in most cases.
So the other thing I've been reading about is that some people may be facing absolutely astronomical bills. coming in, depending on the plan they have, I guess, for electricity. Can you explain a little bit of that?
They have Texas in its free market deal allows people to, when you sign a contract with an energy company, an electricity company, you can either pick a flat rate or some provide a floating rate, an adjustable rate that will go up or down with the gas prices. I always take a flat rate. Just because I like the sort of the sense there of the surety, but there's something else that had been going on for a little while with an organization called Gritty, which some people had joined. I think I'd actually got promotions from this. I think even from the town I'm in, that you could join this. They're out there negotiating things, so you might be changing power company from 1 month to the next month to the next month. And some of these people have got these huge power bills because the power was spiking, the price was spiking. And that price spike is supposed to encourage, because the prices spike both in the highest heat of summer and the coldest part of winter, that's supposed to encourage the generator plants and so forth to make sure that they're winterized and they can continue producing, because they'll be able to benefit from the higher spikes. But it's usually a little bit higher, not dramatically higher.
Okay.
And of course,
Now
the governor stepped in right then and said, we're going to stop this. People should not be getting a bill for $13,000, $16,000. And some people didn't. I heard one lady say, I didn't have my electricity on, and we got these huge bills. So they will have to address that, I suspect.
I suspect there'll be some demand for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've heard the same stories that Dr. Matthews is talking about. People getting electric bills for $9,000-$10,000, and that is the one. I was nodding along with Dr. Matthews when he said, always lock into a flat rate. I do too, and that's exactly why. In fact, I think we had just locked in ours just prior to this happening, so it was serendipitous, I guess. But yeah, I expect the legislature probably will act on that. What that action will look like, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, especially when you have people that didn't have power and then they're getting a bill for thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah, I mean, Abbott mentioned it in his speech the other night. So, we'll have to wait and see.
Somebody's got to pay, though. So do you think the legislature will appropriate money for the power companies?
I think there'll probably be at least some people advocating that they tap into the rainy day fund for it.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know you all have a story. We hope and pray here at Point of View that your damage was not bad, that you survived well, and that if not, that the things that need to be fixed can be fixed quickly. It's hard when you've got problems with your plumbing or your flooding or your home. That's just a tough thing to live through, and it can be expensive. So, our hearts are out there with all the folks, since this hour is mostly in Texas, a little bit in some other spots around the country. So that's why we've given this time to discussing this, event that really affected all of us. But before the break, I just want to kind of preview the rest of the show. First of all, in the next hour, we will be bringing back a guest that I had earlier this week. His name is Matt Green, and he's a producer. He made a faith-based movie called Man from Nowhere, and I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was well done. We talked to him a little bit, but we wanted to continue because sometimes people need something interesting and absorbing to do over the weekend. So we like to talk about movies on Fridays. So Matt Green will join us to talk about Man from Nowhere and also just faith-based movies in general. And then the Equality Act, which we've talked about ad infinitum here at Point of View, been worried about, passed the House of Representatives. That was no surprise. And we will discuss some of the repercussions of that and what we think it may be, its prospects in the United States Senate. That has always been a bulwark to protect us against the Equality Act. Isn't this time. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about a Clinton advisor, Naomi Wolf, who is actually warning. She's pretty far to the left, or just has been a radical feminist. But she's now warning about the policies to protect the country from COVID, the lockdowns and all of that are really totalitarian. And she's describing them that way, which is a little bit surprising for someone on the left. But her article, which we posted at pointofview.net, makes a lot of common sense. So we'll discuss that, and we'll just talk about when it's time to end the lockdowns. It's about time, I think. We'll talk about that and a lot more right after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View. A $15 per hour minimum wage has been a dream of the left for a while now. Such an arbitrary number. Why not $50? Why not $100? If the goal is to lift people out of poverty, the higher the better, right? Not really. This kind of mandate will result in more people earning $0 an hour. Heritage Foundation President Kay James says government-imposed minimum wages are a bad idea to begin with. COVID-19 concerns and restrictions have resulted in tremendous economic devastation. Mrs. James warns a minimum wage increase could push many hard-hit businesses out of business. The federal minimum wage is now $7.25 an hour. A proposal to get it to $15 is part of the massive coronavirus relief bill being debated in Congress. The president really wants this, but he's facing opposition from key Senate moderates from his own party. These lawmakers don't want to further burden constituents already struggling to save their businesses and keep their jobs. No industry has been hit harder by COVID restrictions than the restaurant business. Business Insider reports that since the onset of the pandemic, 17% of U.S. restaurants have permanently shut down. About 110,000 establishments, and many more are struggling. The Heritage Foundation recently held an online forum for restaurant owners to explain their unique concerns about a federally mandated minimum wage increase. They explained that because servers and bartenders currently earn a very low minimum, employers are required to supply a tip credit in the event that tips don't get the employee to the minimum wage. The president's proposal eliminates that system, requiring that all employees be paid the federal minimum. Many establishments could not survive that. Servers would lose, as many customers would tip less or not at all. Restaurants operate on low margins. Owners say there's only so much you can raise your prices before you price yourself out of the market. Raising the minimum wage would harm those it's supposed to help. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Dr. Merrill Matthews and Mr. Lathan Watts are in studio with me. And we have to get to religious liberty because we always do that on Fridays. And actually, a couple of matters that came to my attention this week, Lathan. One, First Liberty Institute sent out a press release. Federal court urged to reverse decision dismissing juror who sought divine guidance during deliberations. This case is at the 11th Circuit, and they're deciding if their en banc court will hear it. Is that where you're at?
They did hear it.
Oh, they did hear it. Okay.
This is a really interesting case. I'll try to summarize it quickly because it's at first blush you might wonder what a religious liberty law firm is doing representing a convicted felon member of Congress. Corinne Brown, the case is United States versus Corinne Brown. Corinne Brown was a member of Congress who was convicted on fraud charges. But during her trial, during the deliberation, so the trial was finished, the jury had been given the case, been given their instructions, and the jury was deliberating. One of the jurors said to somebody else on the jury that he had prayed to God for guidance and believed that the Holy Spirit had guided him to the right decision. And that apparently made a juror uncomfortable, and they sent a note to the judge, and the judge dismissed this juror. And his reasons were that he felt that the juror had brought undue outside influence on on their decision.
Okay,
and the judge might be right.
But he said in a way that was inconsistent with the juror's oath. Okay, well, who is the oath to? And what are the last words of that oath?
So help me God.
So this juror took that seriously and asked God's help, believed he got it, and said so, and for that was dismissed from the jury. Now, the right to a fair trial by jury is absolutely fundamental to the American way of life. It's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence in the list of things that Jefferson listed, the offenses of King George. Depriving people of a trial by jury is listed right after taxation without representation. Okay, this is fundamental to the American system of government. There's no more democratic institution in all of America than a jury. Okay, now, Corinne Brown deserves another trial. Another trial may result in the same verdict. She may end up being found guilty again, so be it. But in the law in this country, the ends do not justify the means. Process matters. And you shouldn't.
We learned that in the election.
Right? You should not. This should not be grounds for dismissal from a jury. To pray to God for help, believe that you received it, and say so. So that's why we took the case on appeal. We argued it first in front of a 3-judge panel of the 11th Circuit, which is what you always do at the Court of Appeals level. They upheld the lower court. So we asked for an en banc review for the entire 11th Circuit to hear it, and they did. Was argued on Monday, I believe, Monday or Tuesday. So now we have probably a few months before we get the full court's opinion from the 11th Circuit, and depending on what that opinion is, we may be appealing to the United States Supreme Court, which is interesting. If we do, if that case did end up at the Supreme Court, every time the Supreme Court enters the chamber, they stand at their desks and a crier announces, "God save the United States and this honorable court." There are several devout Catholic members of the United States Supreme Court, and I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that they ask for God's help to make sure that they do their job well and temper justice with mercy and be wise. Why would they deprive a juror of the very same guidance and say that somehow disqualifies you for service on a jury? There are a lot of things that can disqualify you for service on a jury. This shouldn't be one of them. So that's basically it in a nutshell, as best as I can summarize it. Interesting matter, and we'll see what the 11th Circuit says.
Well, first of all, I think folks that listen a lot know that the model that First Liberty Institute uses is to call in lawyers from outside, volunteer attorneys, to argue cases, and they're usually very talented people, and this case is no exception, is it?
No, you're exactly right. Our volunteer counsel on this was Paul Clement, who argued the case in front of the 11th Circuit this week. Paul Clement is a former U.S. Solicitor General. He has probably argued more cases in front of the United States Supreme Court than any attorney in America. So that is the sort of the beauty of the way we do things. Mm-hmm. We have a team of lawyers that work full-time in-house, for First Liberty, but then we partner with excellent litigators and appellate counsel who are in private practice in firms all over the country. That allows us to take a case anywhere in the country, always have local counsel, and have some of the best legal minds in the country working with us.
Another case that I just wanted to touch on here before the end of this hour, and that is because, for one thing, the issue of school choice has become front and center during COVID because parents, it's just become very clear that parents need choice. And a lot of times they don't even have school available for their kids. This case has been going on since before the pandemic, but up in Maine, there is a matter. You are actually sort of teamed up with the Institute for Justice
Correct.
On this Maine school choice case. Explain it.
Yeah. So the state of Maine has a program. Other states have similar programs. There are areas of Maine that are fairly rural where there aren't a lot there aren't enough, say, school-age children for the state to justify building a high school. And if that's the case, the state provides basically like a tuition scholarship for the kids who live in that area, for their parents to choose to where to send them to school, to pay to send them to school somewhere else. And the program, has worked, except the state prohibits parents from sending their kids to a school to a religious school. So the Supreme Court ruled on a very similar tuition kind of scholarship grant program in Montana in the recent term, the Espinoza decision. And basically what the Supreme Court says is, look, states, you don't have to have these programs, but if you do, if you make a benefit available to the general public, you cannot exclude on the basis of religion. So, Maine, if you want to have this program, great, but you can't tell people of faith that they can't send their kids to a school that is in keeping with their faith. If you're going to have a publicly available benefit, you cannot exclude people on the basis of religion.
So where the First Circuit upheld the Maine law to exclude them. So what's next?
So now we file our petition with the U.S. Supreme Court, and likely if they take it, I would, it's always get yourself in trouble predicting what the Supreme Court's going to do. But since they have ruled on a very, very similar case in Montana, I think they might what's called grant, vacate, remand, which is technically they take our case, they vacate the lower court's opinion, in this instance the First Circuit, and remand it back to them in keeping with their Espinoza decision. It's basically like telling
they now
the
look
First Circuit,
at what happened last year.
It's basically like the Supreme Court telling the First Circuit, did you not hear what we said when we ruled on this in Montana? Here, do this again. That's what is hopefully a likely scenario.
Well, Dr. Matthews, it looks like there could be a couple of actual Supreme Court matters that we'll be discussing in coming months that First Liberty Institute's involved in. So that's something to continue to watch, isn't it?
Indeed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue to watch that. And we are also, in the next hour, we will talk about and update you on the Coach Kennedy case. We're going to be talking in the next hour about the passage in the House of Representatives of the Equality Act, and that has repercussions for Coach Kennedy's case, believe it or not. We'll talk about also how the Equality Act really hurts Christians, and it needs to be opposed in the U.S. Senate. We will be back after these messages.
It is a new year, but we're still dealing with the same old problems. Problems like media bias and censorship, only now those problems are getting worse. Did you ever think that media bias could get worse? What about big tech censorship? Powerful companies like Facebook, YouTube, and Google have targeted Christians and conservatives for years, but now people are being banned from social media sites. Entire social media platforms are being cast offline. Same old problems, only worse. But here's the good news. Even when new years come and old problems get worse, the core solutions stay the same. We do what's right. We stand for freedom. We speak the truth. That's what Point of View has done for almost 50 years and continues doing today. More than ever, Americans need the reliability and perspective that Kirby Anderson and the Point of View team offer. You can stand with Point of View in this battle. Visit pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sitting in Kirby Anderson's chair, and the first thing Kirby did at the end of a record-breaking freezing week last week was head for Alaska. And that's where he is. He's in Alaska. It was actually warmer there when he got there than it was here. But he will be back, I believe, on Monday. And we are going to...
No, he won't be back on Monday.
Oh, he won't?
I'm in Monday.
Okay. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Institute for Policy Innovation, in studio on Monday. And that's... I'm sure people are going to look forward to that because, you know, Buddy... some people that are newer listeners might not know how long you and I have both been around, but we've been around here a long time.
1991 for me.
Wow. Yeah, that's longer than I've been around, but we've been participating in especially the Friday shows, but other shows. Yeah. And we get to sit in for Kirby Anderson when he's out. And so it's such a privilege to be able to do that. And it's been a privilege to know you all these years. So Buddy will be hosting on Monday. Kirby will be back at some point. Mm-hmm. And he's in Alaska visiting our stations there. We have some stations in Alaska, and that just really shows you the reach of Point of View. So that's today's Friday show. I can't even think about fitting everything in that we need to talk about. And of course, part of it is because we've got a new administration who's pushing policies that we, at the deep core of our being, oppose. And so, there's just a lot of battles that are shaping up. And we're going to talk about some of them. One of them is the Equality Act. And the Equality Act was passed in the House. This is the second time the House has passed it. And it really basically is harmful to people who have a sane view of sexuality. It's changes the Civil Rights Act to add sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes. And in doing that, it's basically very detrimental to the rights of Christians. We posted an article, Equality Act is Anti-Christian. You may want to check that out at pointofview.net. And the Senate will have to be the bulwark against this. They have been. But Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute, this time we don't know. And we do have a senator there, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. And you just mentioned to me in the break, he's the most powerful man in America right now on this issue and many others.
Yeah, because of the 50-50 split in the Senate and the fact that they have not done away with the filibuster yet, that makes it very likely that the conservatives in the Senate would be able to block the Senate from passing the Equality Act. The reason I was saying that I think Joe Manchin is now the most powerful man in America is because he is the Democrat who came out very early and said that he would not support changing the rules on the filibuster. And I think he and there's probably, maybe two or three others that understand that what goes around comes around. and that if they do it now, it will come back to haunt them, if and when they're back in the minority. And when you're in a 50-50 split and you have an election coming, that what goes around comes around could be pretty quick. So as long as he stands firm and says we're going to keep the filibuster, then the filibuster's in place, and they don't have 60 votes for the Equality Act. So that's why I say he's a very, very important and very powerful man right now. I think the folks on his side of the aisle will probably put a lot of pressure on him to change his position, either on the filibuster or other things. But if he holds strong and the filibuster stays, then the Equality Act probably dies in the Senate.
It passed in the House 224 to 206. This is what Family Research Council says about it. A radical bill that uses the government to control through coercion how every American thinks, speaks, and acts on issues of human sexuality. And it's really a way of persecuting those who don't embrace radical gender ideology. And it attacks parental rights. It attacks women's sports because it forces males who declare themselves to be females to be able to play on those teams. It's happening in some states already, but this would make it a national policy. And it's really, it just squelches the freedom of people to live their faith. And Dr. Matthews, it's something that, it was so radical that none of us really thought it would ever come to pass in its full orbed, all the provisions of it.
Right.
But now it's a reality. It's a real possibility, isn't it?
It is a possibility. I will give it this. They are trying to do this through legislation because Barack Obama essentially set an executive order saying the Civil Rights and Department of Education and other groups should just simply assume that the Civil Rights Act would cover all of these other things, and they expanded it by fiat rather than by legislation. And there were some of us who said at the time, look, the country has moved that direction to some extent, whether we like it or not, has moved that direction. But if you're going to do something like this, it needs to be done through elected representatives who are held accountable, not through Barack Obama's pen and a phone.
Yeah.
And so at least they're trying to do that. I don't think it will go anywhere, but if you can give them some credit, they're trying to pass it as legislation.
And Lathan, I know that it affects a lot of the work that you do, because one of the things it does is it guts the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And that's been a protector, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I think it's a way for people who actually originally voted for the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, but as Dr. Matthews points out, the country's moved radically in a different direction since then. And it's a way for people who would like to get rid of RFRA, which is kind of the acronym, without having to actually vote on record to say I'm repealing the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, because that sounds bad. Mm-hmm. So we'll pass a new bill like the Equality Act, which sounds good, which actually in effect guts the old one, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Because the Equality Act doesn't really have any sort of protections in it for dissenting opinion based on religious beliefs. And there's another tie into a case that we have that people might not know about. I know we're coming up on a break, so I'm on. Maybe after the break, I can explain with a little more time.
It's the Coach Kennedy case. Okay,
Joe
good.
Kennedy's
People
case.
At least can think about that.
Yeah, exactly. Which you may say, well, that was a coach fired for taking a knee. What does that have to do with the Equality Act? It actually has the potential, his case, to be sort of a balance to the Equality Act, but it's probably more than I can explain in a minute.
Yeah. So we will talk about it in this hour, and yes, it could have huge repercussions for really the body of law and the Supreme Court, all the court's decisions going forward. And so in the next segment, we do have Matt Green joining us for just a segment to discuss a movie that he's actually a producer of. And it's something we discussed earlier this week, and I wanted to get our Friday audience aware of the movie A Man from Nowhere. And so we'll talk with him. Also, later in the program, we're going to talk about sort of the courageous questioning that Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky performed in a committee. We've got some issues with some of the nominees that this administration has made to various high positions. And, most of them are going right through, but this one is pretty radical, and Rand Paul made some very good points. We've got so much more to talk about. Stay with us. We'll do it all after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the framed pictures in my office is a photograph I took at Glacier National Park when I was a teenager. I've always wanted to go back and photograph this beautiful place with a better camera. Also wanted to go back so I could take a picture of the signs that the Park Service put up predicting that all the glaciers would be gone by 2020 due to climate change. In case you don't know, there's still glaciers at Glacier National Park. Yes, some have shrunk, but they certainly have not disappeared as predicted. Kyle Smith used this as one example of the problem with making specific predictions. Saying that sometime in this century we'll have an environmental disaster is much safer than saying it will happen in the next 10 years. He also provides some background to the story of glaciers in this park. The U.S. Geological Survey has been keeping track of the retreat of glaciers in Glacier National Park for some time. The scientists noted that the mean annual temperature has increased, so the glaciers will be gone someday in the next few decades. So that had Smith starting to look at past predictions. For example, a 1923 Associated Press report said glaciers would almost disappear in 25 years. That means they should have been gone by 1948. But there's a 1936 article that predicted that the glaciers would vanish within 25 years, so they should have been gone by 1961. And there's a 1952 AP report that explains that naturalists say that glaciers would be gone in 50 years, so we should have had no glaciers by 2002. By now, I think you can get the idea. All of these past predictions were wrong, but that did not stop others from making other predictions. Someday the glaciers may be gone, but they haven't left yet. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter in studio with Dr. Merrill Matthews and also Lathan Watts. And we are looking forward to our next interview. My guest is Matt Green, and he's basically a producer, a film producer, and he's also he started and he helped begin and oversees the cinema and digital arts emphasis at a liberal arts university master's college in Los Angeles. And so he's training young people in media, in just making movies. And movies are so powerful. So that's why we wanted to bring him back. I actually interviewed Matt earlier this week to talk about his new movie, The Man from Nowhere. Matt, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Well, it's good to have you. And I do have Lathan and Merrill Matthews in studio with me also, and they're going to be chatting with you too. But I just want you to just, in case someone wasn't listening on Wednesday when you were with me, to talk about this movie, The Man from Nowhere. I really enjoyed it. And it's beautifully done, number one, and also it's a picture of healing and restoration that can happen between a father and son. So I think it's something that, a lot of us can relate to.
Right. Yeah, it's a prodigal father story. and he's trying to reconnect with his wayward son. And, the main things that we really wanted to touch on with this film is that our time here on earth is precious and not to waste that. And specifically as parents, as we're raising our children, just making sure that we're really trying to put the focus on what our true purpose here on earth is. And it's not for ourselves, but it's to honor and glorify the Lord. And so that's really we want to touch on a father-son story, because oftentimes they're neglected in faith films. So.
We love to feature faith-based movies here on Point of View, and I think one of the things that I noticed about this movie is you didn't look at it as a faith-based movie as you get into the movie. You look at it as a wonderful, well-done story, compelling, and I think that was by design, wasn't it?
Yeah, thank you for that. It was. We really wanted to tell a moving story. This is, media is probably the most easy way to connect or move an audience with culture these days. And so we figured, okay, well, if we can tell a compelling story that then weaves through it a biblical message, or at least can point to themes that we want to cover, then it would probably resonate more with people, as opposed to doing it the opposite, which was, have a faith message that just beats them over the head, and then maybe a few story points here and there. And it's just not as compelling. You don't walk away feeling moved as much when it's done that way.
This is Merrill Matthews. The market has changed. We see this in records as well. I mean, you used to go through a record company, and and they distributed your music, and everybody knew where that went, and it went through disc jockeys and so forth. But movies and music have changed dramatically, and there's all kinds of outlets for you. How do you distribute and get your movie out to other people? Is Hollywood amenable to running this? Do you have to move? Do Christian movies need to move through just individual releases, especially in a pandemic when people don't go to movies anymore?
Yeah, Meryl, that's a great question. Hollywood, the good thing about Hollywood is all about money.
Right.
And so they're whether it's, yes, you'll see them take certain stands, but at the end of the day, they're about making money. And so they will always, because typically a lot of these faith films, there's a hungry market for these type of films. And so they're definitely have their doors open to these type of films. The very first faith film that I ever did was a film with Lionsgate, and it was called No Greater Love. And it was really their first faith paddle that they had ever done. And they did a small little release, and it did extremely well for them. And now they do, 3 or 4 a year. And so the great thing that has happened with the streaming platforms is it's opened the door for so many other filmmakers. When I first started, it was film and TV. That's how you got in. And now I tell students all the time, if you have a phone, which every single one of them do, you have a mini studio in your hand. And the bottom line is, it doesn't matter how you make your film. If you make a compelling, powerful story, that's all that matters. That's what draws the audience in. So if you shot that on your film, doesn't matter. On your phone, it doesn't matter. So tell a good story. And because there seems to be a new medium popping up all the time in terms of delivery, the doors are just wide open. It seems like a new streaming platform opening daily.
Well, Mr. Green, this is Lathan Watts. Day job, work for First Liberty Institute, but I am a film junkie, and I'm always interested in people who make good movies, what movies influence them. And when just looking at, I haven't had a chance to see your film yet, but I was looking at the stuff that Penna sent me about it. And I love, a father-son story. And I was thinking of 2 or 3, that are favorites of mine. River Runs Through It, Field of Dreams. Any man who's watched that and doesn't cry when those 2 guys play catch at the end, there's something wrong with you. So I was curious, just to ask you what types of film or directors or movie makers that have influenced you over your career.
Sure. Yes. So I was blessed. So my dad worked for Universal Studios for 30 plus years. And so I grew up on the back lot, and it's kind of hard to grow up there and not want to be a part of it in some capacity. And I'll never forget, I still remember the first movie I ever saw in the theater that I remember was Karate Kid.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing it
my
in
kids to that
84.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, the original. And then Back to the Future is the second one. But the movie that really made me want to make movies was Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's my favorite film of all time. And I'm a huge admirer, as most people are that are film junkies, of Spielberg. But this film in particular is definitely. I think I said before on the previous episode we were chatting. I said the Western is my favorite genre, but second to that is film noir. I love film noir. So I grew up on the Maltese Falcon, and
Double Indemnity,
and all these old Double Indemnity, exactly. All these classics, Casablanca, Citizen Kane, these movies that. Again, I tell my students all the time, I said, listen, you've got to go back and be, if you're going to make movies, you need to be a historian of what's come before you. And some of the greatest films of all time didn't happen before 2000, like most of my students think. We're talking, Ben-Hur, these classics of cinema. And I tell students all the time, I'm like, Ben-Hur is one of the best faith films I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. The way that they handle Christ in that movie, I think is so powerful because you never hear him talk and you never see him from the front. It's always from behind. And his dialogue is always told by other people. So you hear what other people say, well, Christ said this, and how they were affected by that. And it's a very powerful redemption story. And often people don't think of it as a faith film. But to me, it's one of the best that's ever been done. And so, those all definitely impacted me as a kid growing up. My grandparents were huge John Wayne fans. And so I grew up loving John Wayne. So,
one quick last question. You mentioned about the releasing of them and movie. Hollywood's all about money. What about raising funds? Because so many movies go out and they have to raise funds from someone. Do faith-based films have a easy access to funding for the films?
Yeah, that's the hardest part of making movies is raising the funds. The part that I like the least. Just because it's sometimes an awkward conversation, but it's a needed part. And so there are people who believe in this and they share the same, it's like any other thing. You've got to find people who share the same belief in terms of what you're trying to do and the message that you're trying to get out there. And again, we're trying to, the culture is lost to a lot of this stuff. And so we're trying to regain some of that towards something that has redeeming value. And there are those who, have the means and share a like-mindedness in that. And they're out there. And so we were blessed on this film to have that. People who believed in what we were trying to do and the story we were trying to tell. And so, yes, it's hard to do, but there are people out there.
Matt, I want to thank you for coming back and joining us again today. I might mention that you love film noir, and it's combined into this movie in sort of a parallel storyline, which was really well done. And folks, just a recommendation from us, go ahead and watch it over the weekend. We have it linked at pointofview.net, but also, Matt, just real quick, can you tell us how to find it?
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to our website, which is Man From Nowhere Movie. Might help if I get it right. manfromnowheremovie.com, and it's also available on Amazon.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our movie recommendation for the weekend. Matt Green, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all very much. It's my pleasure.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with a lot more on this Friday weekend edition. We'll be back after these messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Well, the Senate is in the process of confirming and debating some of the nominees for high positions, for cabinet positions and others in the Biden administration. And we are going to talk about some of those, most notably one position who I think is Assistant HHS Secretary. And Rand Paul basically questioned this nominee. And the questions were actually bold, brave, courageous, and necessary. And we're going to talk about that later in this segment. But first, Lathan, I want to go back to the Equality Act. We discussed the Equality Act, and certainly it impinges upon the ability of Christians to live their lives, operate their businesses, be students according to their beliefs. And also just on certain freedoms, like, for instance, it would open up women's sports to men nationwide, not just being decided by a certain state or locality. Everybody would have to do this. A lot of this is so out there. And part of this bill, of course, is because in these situations, Christians and other groups will come back and sue. And they would use the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to demand their rights in court. So that, they've been very proactive here. They're also eviscerating RFRA. And so in a sense, and that was a result of a bad court decision, too. So just explain how the Equality Act could affect one of your big cases, Coach Kennedy.
Right. So actually, it's one of our cases, Coach Kennedy, could have an impact on the Equality Act. So as you mentioned, under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, when issues like this come up, whether it's the sorts of things that are now in the Equality Act, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act sort of created an affirmative defense for people of faith who found themselves on the wrong side of those issues in court. Now, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was passed by Congress. If you want to know how much things have changed, it passed almost unanimously. It was carried in the House by then Congressman Chuck Schumer. It was championed in the Senate by Ted Kennedy, and it was signed into law by Bill Clinton. This was Congress's reaction to a Supreme Court decision called Employment Division versus Smith. And Employment Division versus Smith changed the way the Supreme Court looks at government action that affects religious liberty. It's the reason why Coach Kennedy's case was brought as a free speech case, not a free exercise case. Because what it did, the opinion effectively lowered the bar of scrutiny by the court on government action. Prior to Employment Division versus Smith, it was the highest level of scrutiny that the court looks at government action with. They call it strict scrutiny. And the government had to show, and it was on the government to prove, that the government had a compelling interest in what they were doing, in whatever that activity may be, whatever the bill or law was, that their action was sort of narrowly tailored to that interest, and that they took the least restrictive means available to them as it relates to religious liberty. And if you couldn't satisfy those things, then your law or action was ruled unconstitutional. That's the highest level of scrutiny there was. Employment Division versus Smith basically got rid of that and said, as long as the law is neutral on its face, which means it doesn't point blank say in the law, religious people can't do this, and as long as it's generally applicable, it means it's not targeted at one section of society or another, it's applied to everybody generally, then it's constitutional. That lowered the bar of what the government had to get over to do things so low that it made winning a free exercise case nearly impossible. So when we took Coach Kennedy's case to the Supreme Court, we filed it as a free speech issue because, as I just said, winning a free exercise claim became, the free exercise clause is basically dormant after Employment versus Smith. But that's why when the Supreme Court initially declined to hear Coach Kennedy's case, when they issued the opinion explaining why, that's why that was so important. Number one, it's very rare that they do that because they deny thousands of cases every term, and they don't have time to explain why. But 4 justices signed on to this little explanation, written by Alito, joined by Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. And in there, they said, basically, and we've been over this before, but they said basically there's some issues of fact, some questions of fact all the way back at the district court level that we don't think were clarified enough. And if we took the case right now, we'd get bogged down in a lot of factual issues. And that's really not what you want the court to do. You want them to answer the big First Amendment question. Then they went out of their way to criticize the Ninth Circuit's opinion, which they didn't have to, but they did. They said they found it extremely troubling and that it might warrant review in the future.
So they were really encouraging you back.
Exactly. And in the very last part of that little explanation, Justice Alito says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it says, we see this was brought as a free speech claim when the petitioner clearly has a free exercise claim. Perhaps that's because of previous decisions by this court, which we have not yet been asked to review. That's Justice Alito doing everything but include an eye wink emoji saying, bring this back up here so we can do something about Employment Division versus Smith. So we took that as our sort of game plan for Coach Kennedy. So we went back to the district court, clarified the record, that he's still bound by the Ninth Circuit's opinion, so he rules against us. So now we go back to the Ninth Circuit, which we just did a couple of weeks ago, argued it at the Ninth Circuit again. Depending on what they do, I anticipate they'll probably rule against us again. Then we'll go back to the Supreme Court and say, hey, remember us when you asked us to bring this back to fix Employment versus Smith and, take care of Coach Kennedy at the same time? How does that relate to the Equality Act? If the Equality Act passed and basically got rid of RFRA, but the Supreme Court took Kennedy and got rid of Smith, you're back to where you were before.
So you don't need RFRA, really.
Exactly. RFRA was a response to Employment Division versus Smith. So if the Supreme Court fixes Smith, you're basically back to where you were. So it would be sort of the antidote to the Equality Act if the Equality Act was passed and signed into law, because it would restore that very, very high bar of scrutiny by the court that the government has to get over. And I frankly don't think the Equality Act could get past it.
So where are you with the Kennedy case now?
So we went back to the district court, clarified the record, then went back to the Ninth Circuit, which we re-argued it in front of the Ninth Circuit about 2-3 weeks ago. So we're going to have to wait on the Ninth Circuit, to issue their opinion.
And when do you think their opinion will come out?
That it's impossible to know. They can take as long as they want, frankly. And during oral argument, the second time at the Ninth Circuit, one of the three-judge panel mentioned that little note from the Supreme Court about this. And he actually said there's at least 4 justices who are looking at this case as a possible vehicle, to do other things with.
And the Ninth Circuit isn't as bad as it used to be, is it?
It's not. It's basically like 16-13 now as far as the split, as 16 judges that were appointed by more liberal presidents, 13 by conservatives. So we still got a pretty bad panel. We still got, and so I suspect that they will rule against us again. But what's going to be interesting to see is how they write the opinion, because they, like as I said, one mentioned this note from the Supreme Court. So they are probably very well aware that if they write an opinion very similar to the first one, that they are creating an opportunity for us to go to the Supreme Court and overturn them and fix Employment Division versus Smith. So it wouldn't surprise me if they try to write a very, very fact-centric opinion to sort of tell, so the Supreme Court doesn't want to get bogged down in a factual issue again. So we'll see. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, it's fun to see how these folks that we know that are in studio with us every week, like Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts, are actually at the sort of the center of influencing some of these huge issues that affect so much and in our religious liberty. And our religious liberty is just so important. It affects our other freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, I also want to, speaking of religious liberty and clamping down on it, violating it, there's some other nominees who are threatened to do so. And, so one of them is Javier Becerra, who is Attorney General in California right now. I took Kamala Harris's place there. And he is such a pro-abortion, sort of anti-religious liberty. He even opposed the ban on partial birth abortions. And he's come down on pregnancy centers, for instance, in California. He's up for HHS secretary. So, that's one to look at. But also assistant HHS secretary, the nominee for that position, well, I think you're just going to have to wait until after the break for us to really explain this person, Dr. Rachel Levine. I will tell you that Dr. Rachel Levine is a transgendered woman, and she was nominated to the position at Department of Health and Human Services, and there was a hearing with her this week. So we'll talk about it. Later in the program, we're also going to talk about, is it time to relax COVID lockdowns? Some surprising people say yes. We'll talk about that and a lot more after this.
A $15 per hour minimum wage has been a dream of the left for a while now. Such an arbitrary number. Why not $50? Why not $100? If the goal is to lift people out of poverty, the higher the better, right? Not really. This kind of mandate will result in more people earning $0 an hour. Heritage Foundation President Kay James says government-imposed minimum wages are a bad idea to begin with. COVID-19 concerns and restrictions have resulted in tremendous economic devastation. Mrs. James warns a minimum wage increase could push many hard-hit businesses out of business. The federal minimum wage is now $7.25 an hour. A proposal to get it to $15 is part of the massive coronavirus relief bill being debated in Congress. The president really wants this, but he's facing opposition from key Senate moderates from his own party. These lawmakers don't want to further burden constituents already struggling to save their businesses and keep their jobs. No industry has been hit harder by COVID restrictions than the restaurant business. Business Insider reports that since the onset of the pandemic, 17% of U.S. restaurants have permanently shut down, about 110,000 establishments, and many more are struggling. The Heritage Foundation recently held an online forum for restaurant owners to explain their unique concerns about a federally mandated minimum wage increase. They explained that because servers and bartenders currently earn a very low minimum, employers are required to supply a tip credit in the event that tips don't get the employee to the minimum wage. The president's proposal eliminates that system, requiring that all employees be paid the federal minimum. Many establishments could not survive that. Servers would lose, as many customers would tip less or not at all. Restaurants operate on low margins. Owners say there's only so much you can raise your prices before you price yourself out of the market. Raising the minimum wage would harm those it's supposed to help. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We want to kind of put before you a couple of the nominees that this President Biden, has placed, actually now have to be approved by the United States Senate for important positions, especially in the Department of Health and Human Services. And since we've been talking about the Equality Act today, and really the radical regime of the definition of civil rights being not only having to do with race and sex, but also now, according to the sexual orientation and gender identity. And so we're getting away from reality here sometimes when we talk about this. And some of these policies are going to be very detrimental to the beliefs, the rights, and the ability to live your life out of Christians and Christian organizations, Christian nonprofits, and just Americans who believe in biology and science. So we've got this nominee. Not only do we have a radical who's Attorney General of California nominated to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, but the nominee for Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, as I mentioned, is Dr. Rachel Levine, a transgendered woman, which means, in case you don't know, it's a man who identifies as a woman, and it can be done just through the way they dress and act. It can be done through hormones, and it can be done through surgery, and we're not sure where this person is at. You could find out more about it by going to pointofview.net and checking out an article from the American Conservative that we've posted there, and you'll be able to see the picture of the nominee. But Senator, so she came before the Health and Human Resources Committee. Senator Rand Paul's on that committee, and he was well prepared with his questions for the nominee, and asked several questions about the wisdom of allowing minors to make decisions about changing gender hormonally and surgically. So, we've got some audio from that of the senator. Let's go to it right now.
Dr. Levine, you have supported both allowing minors to be given hormone blockers to prevent them from going through puberty, as well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia. Like surgical mutilation, hormonal interruption of puberty can permanently alter and prevent secondary sexual characteristics. The American College of Pediatricians reports that 80 to 95% of prepubertal children with gender dysphoria will experience resolution by late adolescence if not exposed to medical intervention and social affirmation. Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field with robust research and standards of care that have been developed. And if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Health, I would look forward to working with you and your office and coming to your office and discussing the particulars of the standards of care for transgender medicine.
The specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia? You have said that you're willing to accelerate the protocols for street kids. I'm alarmed that poor kids with no parents who are homeless and distraught, you would just go through this and allow that to happen to a minor. What I'm alarmed at is that you're not willing to say absolutely minors shouldn't be making decisions to amputate their breast or to amputate their genitalia. For most of our history, we have believed that minors don't have full rights and the parents need to be involved. So I'm alarmed that you won't say with certainty that minors should not have the ability to make the decision to take hormones that will affect them for the rest of their life. Will you make a more firm decision on whether or not minors should be involved in these decisions?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field. And if confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question.
Senator Rand Paul, I have to say, gentlemen, is a courageous senator these days. I mean, the questions he's asking make a lot of common sense, but today it takes a lot of courage to ask them. First of all, even as much as the President Biden, did signal to us during the campaign that he supported children being able to make changes in their gender. They can't really change their gender, but have this type of treatment and surgery. I'm really shocked that such a nominee actually is out there to such an important position. Are you guys?
No.
No?
I'm not shocked that this is the nominee. I'm not shocked that that's their position. It is the Democratic Party is as radically left as it has ever been, especially on this issue. And this is it is a make or break issue for their party. You will not win a Democratic presidential primary on the other side of this issue, and that's why Joe Biden supported it. It's why his nominee will do exactly what Rand Paul asked Dr. Levine, which is why Dr. Levine would not answer.
Generally speaking, when Democrats take control, they overreach. They go way past where they should. And if they were a little more moderate, as Barack Obama had promised he would be when he ran for election, you wouldn't see, I don't think, quite the pushback that we see. But this is what they're doing with sexuality is fundamentally wrong, and it's pushing America much, much further than it wants to go, or that it thinks even has a sense or a right to go. So I'm mystified as to why they're doing that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. Although I know how far left they are, it just doesn't seem smart.
In a number of African countries, do practice genital mutilation on young girls. It's a cultural thing, but it is frequently condemned by the World Health Organization. Every other organization condemns this.
And Paul made that point. Senator Paul did make that point.
He did make that point before he gets to this. Sometimes it's done by force. Sometimes it's done by cultural pressure to push it on. The things that he's talking about, they're not just right-wing or Republican sort of opposition. Much of the stuff is standard. I mean, the world has condemned it. And yet to not step up and say, Senator, we certainly would not want to have this forced on anybody. She just simply didn't do that. I'm amazed at this.
And don't miss the point that Dr. Rand Paul, and remember, he is a doctor.
He's a doctor.
Yeah.
He is a medical doctor.
Yeah, and as is his father. But don't miss the point in there in his question where he said 80 to 95% of children who experience gender dysphoria, in other words, they're a boy who doesn't want to be a boy, or they're a girl that thinks they're a boy, 80 to 95% of them will reach resolution. In other words, they will get through it and learn to deal with it by the end of adolescence, unless you start hormone therapy, you start blocking puberty, or you go into surgery. And his question was, is it wise to let a 5-year-old make this decision?
I would even say even a teenager.
Of course.
It's becoming sort of a cool thing for teen girls.
Exactly.
To change their gender.
And that's his point. Like, throughout our history, we have said there's a reason we don't let children make decisions. There's a reason children don't have all the same rights as adults. They're incapable of making decisions like this. And if you allow a child to make this decision at this point, you have allowed them to determine the rest of their life. And they're not equipped to make that decision. That's why, if we're going to go down this madness, you have to at least have the parent involved.
I would say so. If you would like to weigh in on this issue, what do you think of Rand Paul's questions? What do you think of Dr. Levine's answers? The number's 800-351-1212. We've got a long break, but stick with us and we'll be back.
It is a new year, but we're still dealing with the same old problems. Problems like media bias and censorship, only now those problems are getting worse. Did you ever think that media bias could get worse? What about big tech censorship? Powerful companies like Facebook, YouTube, and Google have targeted Christians and conservatives for years, but now people are being banned from social media sites. Entire social media platforms are being cast offline. Same old problems, only worse. But here's the good news. Even when new years come and old problems get worse, the core solutions stay the same. We do what's right. We stand for freedom. We speak the truth. That's what Point of View has done for almost 50 years and continues doing today. More than ever, Americans need the reliability and perspective that Kirby Anderson and the Point of View team offer. You can stand with Point of View in this battle. Visit pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Some momentous decisions to be made on nominees of this administration by the United States Senate. We are talking about those. In studio with me, I am Penna Dexter. In studio with me is Dr. Merrill Matthews, Institute for Policy Innovation, and also Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. We've been talking a lot about the passage of the Equality Act in the House of Representatives and also the Biden nominees. And one in particular is for Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Rachel Levine, and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky questioned her and really tried to nail her down on the issue of gender change hormones and surgeries in children and whether children should be able to make those decisions. Can you believe that somebody in our government will not deny that or will not affirm that children do not have those kinds of rights or should not? But she refused to answer the questions. We put an article at pointofview.net. It's from the American Conservative, actually by Rod Dreher. And you might want to check that out. You'll see her picture and see how serious this really is. But Lathan, as we look at this, we also see that, you know, these ideas have been dealt with, and sort of the plate has been set for us to understand these issues a little more by a very brilliant scholar, Ryan Anderson, wrote a book a couple of years ago about it and about the damage done to children, the threat to children. And so that book's been out there. He was at Heritage Foundation. We had him on Point of View. Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, this week, he was basically canceled, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think Amazon took his book down. You couldn't find it there if you were looking for it. The name of the book is called When Harry Became Sally, sort of play on words from the popular movie. And it's a great book. I read it when it came out. Very compassionately discusses the issue of transgender. I think the subtitle is Answering the Transgender Moment in America. And it is not, as I said, I mean, he takes a very compassionate view towards the issue. And that should be the approach towards the issue. We should deal with people who are dealing with issues about their identity as a man or a woman with compassion. And the compassionate thing to do is to help them work through that issue, not to tell them that, oh, well, clearly you're not a man. You're just in a man's body, and therefore if we pump you full of hormones or mutilate you with surgery, you'll eventually be happy. The compassionate thing to do is to speak the truth to that person lovingly and say, you know, to a certain degree, I'm sorry that you're having to go through this. Let me help you through this so that you can become comfortable with the fact that you are a man. And that's sort of the point of his book. And he tells many, many terribly sad stories of people who went through it, regretted it, and now, you know, have tried to sort of go back. That some things that you do in this process cannot be undone. And just this week, Amazon decided to take that book down. Now, I think lots of people have found it elsewhere, because if I've read correctly, his sales are up. But it is a good book. I would recommend it.
But, you know, the issue here is you have children and you have adults. So adults sometimes make this decision. I think Bruce Jenner, wasn't it, made the decision to become a woman. Was it Caitlyn Jenner, or is that, I believe that's...
yeah, I think so.
And so he makes that decision, and we may disagree with it, but it's his life. He's an adult. He can make that decision even if I think it's bad. it's the children that is the issue. And was for some of these children, I am almost certain that they have parents who are trying to push the liberal agenda and are in essence trying to encourage that child to go along with this. I mean, in a sense of just making sure that child has the support of doing it, maybe even encouraging some of it a little bit, because it may become something of a status symbol among the left to say, I have a transgender child. I'm amazed at this. Even if you think your child has gender dysphoria, why you wouldn't say we're going to work with you, we're going to love you, and when you become an adult, you can make that decision one way or the other. But if we push you through this and you start bringing very, very harmful medicine in here, hormones and other things, it affects you as a child and not just mentally, but physically.
Let's take some calls. We've got a full bank of phones here. Kate is in Maine. Kate, thanks for calling in. Am I getting Kate, or am I doing the wrong thing here and trying to open up the call?
You got to do it by the check.
Yeah, I see that.
To the right of it.
Brand new phone system to me. Here she is. Hi, Kate. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, I'm so glad to talk to you guys. I had an opportunity to watch, my sister sent me the link, to watch Rand Paul question this Dr. Rachel.
You know, Kate,
and I thought...
Okay, keep talking. We were getting a real rough piece of audio there, but if you keep talking, I think it might smooth out.
Okay, I'll stay still. I walk when I talk.
Okay.
So I thought he was extremely self-controlled and asked a very good question for which he got no answer. He kept saying, "You've evaded the question." And I think that one of you made a terrific point that a child can't make this decision. Since when? I think it used to be a child couldn't even get a Band-Aid put on, in the public school unless the parent gave the okay. Maybe that's a little over zealous in my example, but I think, and I love the fact that you brought out compassion. My heart is going out to people that are confused about this, but certainly not a child. And I too I've known cases, a personal case where the boy wanted to become a woman, he did, and later committed suicide. We are all heartbroken about it. And you can kind of see in a person's life, you know what it's like growing up as a teenager. You want to be accepted by the crowd, but this is something terribly. I think it's a bad influence. I remember I had heard a professor at Johns Hopkins Hospital said we have got to stop doing these operations on these kids because it's a no turning back. There's no turning back. And I think what I liked what you said, if as an adult you still want to do this, I personally, as Kate, might not agree with you, but you're a person that God created. I'm going to love you. I think compassion is what we need. And I think saying that a child can't make this decision is the most compassionate thing we can do. What is happening to today's parents? What's happening to our educational system? What's happening to the doctors? We're supposed to look to them. Well, Pandora's box is open wide and nothing makes sense.
Okay,
so,
be prepared for the time when the federal government says to a doctor, you can't refuse to give this child transgender surgery because that's part of the law now.
Yeah, it could be part of the Equality Act if that ever passed.
Oh, my goodness.
Hey,
I have
thank you
two
so much.
granddaughters. One second. I have two
We gotta
granddaughters
jump in.
and I
We've
have
got a break.
and a grandson. And
Yeah.
my prayer for them is you guys stay strong in who God made you to be.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good parental advice there. Some parents are going along with it. Other parents don't even know what's going on at the school with regard to allowing the kids to act as the opposite gender. So we have all of the above. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue taking calls. We're also going to talk about lockdowns. When's it time to end? We've got a couple of, one far left feminist who says we got to stop this nonsense. And that's Naomi Wolf. We'll talk about that and a lot more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the framed pictures in my office is a photograph I took at Glacier National Park when I was a teenager. I've always wanted to go back and photograph this beautiful place with a better camera. Also wanted to go back so I could take a picture of the signs that the Park Service put up predicting that all the glaciers would be gone by 2020 due to climate change. In case you don't know, there's still glaciers at Glacier National Park. Yes, some have shrunk, but they certainly have not disappeared as predicted. Kyle Smith used this as one example of the problem with making specific predictions. Saying that sometime in this century we'll have an environmental disaster is much safer than saying it will happen in the next 10 years. He also provides some background to the story of glaciers in this park. The U.S. Geological Survey has been keeping track of the retreat of glaciers in Glacier National Park for some time. The scientists noted that the mean annual temperature has increased, so the glaciers will be gone someday in the next few decades. So that had Smith starting to look at past predictions. For example, a 1923 Associated Press report said glaciers would almost disappear in 25 years. That means they should have been gone by 1948. But there's a 1936 article that predicted that the glaciers would vanish within 25 years, so they should have been gone by 1961. And there's a 1952 AP report that explains that naturalists say that glaciers would be gone in 50 years, so we should have had no glaciers by 2002. By now, I think you can get the idea. All of these past predictions were wrong, but that did not stop others from making other predictions. Someday the glaciers may be gone, but they haven't left yet. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We are taking your calls, and we've got a full bank of phones. If our phones are busy, you can try again later in the program, and we will take it. But let's go to Kurt in Georgia. Kurt's got a comment on Dr. Levine. Hi, Kurt. Thanks for calling.
Hey, how are you? I'm in traffic, so I'll try to be really quick.
Okay.
I agree with what Kate said, and I got to tell you, number one, we need to quit playing God and pray to God. This country's got to turn around, repent, and turn back to God. Now, real quick, there's a Christian comedian named Michael Jr. Now, I don't want to bring up his name for this or anything except to say he has a joke that explains it all. He says his 4-year-old son says to him, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor." He says, "Oh, great," or a dinosaur. And I say that to say kids don't know what they want. I mean, we should not put this kind of pressure on kids. Parents have got to step in and say, look, let's slow your roll. Let's pray about it. Let's take this, slowly. Now, and I'll also say a person that I went to high school with, I saw years later, I didn't recognize him. And the person, looked at me and said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." And the person said, "Well, you knew me as this name, a male name, and now this person's a female." Well, that person made that decision as an adult, and they had I'm not going to say medically valid reason, but I have to respect them for what they did, but they made the decision as an adult.
Yeah, I guess that's where we have to go. In a sense, I still worry about the rights of the medical community who, for conscience reasons would object, but may be forced to do it. Thank you so much, Kurt, for your call. We appreciate it.
As a pastor, I don't ever want to ever be told I have to marry this person or that person. You know what I'm saying? So doctors should never be told you have to do this.
Right.
Amen.
So,
okay.
God bless y'all. Keep it going.
God bless you. Okay, let's go to Faye in Georgia. We've got Faye, except for I can't get rid of Kurt. Somebody could help me maybe do that.
The little X over there.
You don't want to get rid of me, do you?
No, I just want to move on. Anyway, okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are taking your calls, and if I get my act together on how to work this thing, it will be really good. Here we go. Here we've got Faye in Georgia. Thanks for calling in. We appreciate your call.
Thank you. Thank you for your program. What a blessing. Keep sharing the truth. On Tuesday, you had a program, and Melissa Fisher was on it, and there was a Dr. Gurdon, I believe. He had written a book about Christian ethics. Anyway, all this falls into play. On Melissa Fisher's broadcast, she was talking about how she was looking for happiness and how she got absorbed in looking for happiness down the wrong ways, and that was one was lesbianism. And Dr. Gerwin was talking about the fact that, you know, we can play, just like what the gentleman just before said about playing God, about the fact the chromosomes are set, the male and female chromosomes are set, and unless these people that want these transgender ideas want to have multiple surgeries, they ultimately can never become that sex of desire. And
well, once you're a man, you're a man. Once you're a woman, you're a woman. And it doesn't really matter what you do. Yeah.
You still keep the same
that's
chromosomes.
right. And just like what the brother said before, we got to pray, but we need to realize and look at Romans 1:18 through 32, and it as my pastor, Pastor Carl Brogy out of Beaufort, South Carolina, said back in April, have we angered God, and talked about the depraved mind. And no doubt we're just becoming, our consciences are being seared by all of this, and we're playing God. And it's a sad day in America for our children. I'm a retired teacher, and yes, children are not able to make those decisions. I even can think back to when I was even 19, and if I could go back and change some things that I did or said at 19.
Sure. Yeah, that's 19.
And
Absolutely.
And it's just amazing. But yes, we need to press in and pray, and we need to take a stand. And God bless Rand Paul and the others that are taking a stand. Okay. And hopefully we need to plow ahead. But God bless you guys for your program. And please
thanks so
check
much.
out
Thanks
Romans
for your comments.
1. Thank you. God bless.
In Romans 1 it's a convicting chapter in order to sort of help us get a grip on these issues. But Kay made some really good points, and we've got some other folks who are waiting also, and we'll take those calls. But I want to introduce another subject right now during this segment, and that is it was a little surprising news that came this week that Naomi Wolf, who is she was actually part of the Clinton administration, she was an advisor to President Clinton. She now sees the measures we're taking to mitigate COVID-19 that have lasted, basically a year now, and we've got a vaccine, and we're finding the things that work and the things that don't work. And so the numbers are going down, but a lot of the policies and the procedures are staying in place. So she says that the United States is swiftly moving into a coup situation, a police state, as she puts it, as a result of the president's ongoing coronavirus-related economic shutdowns. And she says she believes the orders are being improperly extended under the guise of a real medical pandemic. Not partisan, she said. She said this is actually, the state has crushed businesses, and we're seeing that all over the place. Joe Biden has now talked about the fact that even with the vaccine, we may have to continue with the masking and some of the other distancing. And, how long is it going to go on, and when is it going to end? And she says whether they are on the left or the right, they do these things. And now we're at something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And remember, she's fairly far to the left. It is step 10, and that is the suspension of the rule of law. And that is when you start to be a police state. And we're here. and there is no way around it. And she just really talks about the totalitarian tendencies and leanings of some of our policies right now. She was on Tucker Carlson talking about this, and it was just, to me, I like an honest liberal, someone that looks at things and is not partisan about it. I think that was the case with Naomi Wolf, and we posted that, and we've also posted a piece by Russ Douthat of the New York Times, because he's also questioning some of these measures, and I think it is time to question it. I worry that if we continue, even with masks and distancing, which are things that aren't going to harm you forever, they may sound harmless, but I think we're changing ourselves. We're making ourselves more fearful. We're making ourselves more antisocial, afraid of other people, that we're going to catch something from them. And I think, and I guess that's kind of the discussion I'd like to have with you, just as we talk about coronavirus and, what are our next steps. Part of that, I think, is just not letting ourselves be too changed by what's been going on for the last year and could continue for a while. So, we'll open the phones for that too. 800-351-1212.
Well, I would argue that it's not the right and the left. By and large, some Republican governors, it was governors who shut down, not the federal government. Some Republican governors went along with that. Not everybody, but some did. Mostly Democrats did. And by and large, the Democrats have been supportive of it. Republican governors have tried to open back up as soon as possible. And I give them a little bit, I give all the governors a little bit of wiggle room here, because they were being told by many of the medical experts, you have to shut this down to get this under control. So most of the states did, and we didn't get it under control. So it's the Republicans have been trying to move us away from this. But from her standpoint, it's interesting, because liberals have been historically so much about freedom, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and so forth, and the left has lost that now. It's just not there anymore.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I sort of cutting the governors some slack in the beginning based on what they were being told. But I also agree with you that they were told this will stop it.
Right.
And then it didn't. And that's where the amount of slack I cut them stops abruptly. Because once it didn't work, there is no excuse for you to keep things locked down. And the governors that did open up have been able to show, like in Florida, like in South Dakota and other places. And obviously, there's lots of factors. There's population, how the number of people that live there and how closely they're packed in together, yada, yada, yada. But once it's been proven that we've done everything you've told us to do and it didn't do what you told us it was going to, we don't need to spend another $1 trillion we don't have. What we need is to open the economy. When people go back to work, they will have the money they need. They don't need the government to print another $1 trillion when we're already $28 trillion in debt to send me a check. Open the economy. Let people go back to work. That's what the country needs.
Yeah, you brought up this quote-unquote stimulus bill, and really hardly any of it is stimulus. And we saw today even that new unemployment applications have gone down for the first time in many months today. So we will discuss all these issues and take your calls right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And Lathan Watts and Merrill Matthews, and we are discussing the COVID emergency right now. Russ Duthat wrote his opinion piece at the New York Times. We posted it at pointofview.net. The COVID emergency must end. He talked about how President Biden and Dr. Fauci, who are now the most prominent voices on public health in America, supposedly, they've been asked when we can hope for a return to normalcy. And a lot of people were thinking, well, with the vaccine, that was going to be accelerated. But they, and Russ Duthat says both their takes look way too pessimistic. They're saying pretty much the end of 2021, Christmas time.
Oh, and I heard Dr. Fauci this week say a grandmother who has been vaccinated may never be able to hug her grandchildren again because the children may have COVID-19 and be asymptomatic and might pass it on to the grandmother, even though she's vaccinated. She might still get some symptoms and may be hard on her and so forth. And I thought,
why do we have the vaccine then?
Why do we have the vaccine then? And when you get that strict, you're going to lose the public. I mean, people were willing to go along with, generally speaking, with lockdowns for the first few weeks. But at some point you say, the things you're coming out with, you're just... most of the people I know are just fed up and they're ready to move on, even if it is going to be a little risky. And I don't think we're going. Some of these things we're not going to change to the liking of some of the health professionals.
Yeah, and I think that's what it will take. I mean, it's sort of a symptom of human nature that when people get into power, they don't want to give it up. And yeah, I think it is going to take the American people finally saying, I don't care what you say anymore. I'm done with this.
Right.
I would love to see Anthony Fauci try to tell my mother she could not hug my daughters.
Really?
And watch what happens. We are at a point now.
Tell me I can't hug my grandchildren.
Right. We are at a point now with the vaccines where we know enough about the disease. People know what the risks are. And if they want to assume the risk, they will assume the risk. And yeah, we're vaccinating close to 1 million people a day now.
I think a little over.
And I think it was the Wall Street Journal, just a week or so ago, so that we would be approaching herd immunity by April.
Yes.
So you're talking like 2 months, and I think Dr. Fauci, with all due respect, just the number of positions he's taken on whether or not you should wear a mask.
Now it's 2 or 3 masks.
Right. I mean, he started out, no, you don't need one, because he thought people would hoard them. And then it became, yes, you need one. Then it became, you must wear one. And now it's, well, two's better than one.
And now Joe Biden wants to send everybody a mask in the country.
Exactly. So I think you're right, Dr. Matthews. I think that there's a large section of the population that are just fed up. And when that segment of the population becomes large enough, then you will finally see some of this nonsense stop. And I think that's what it's going to take. It will take the American people just finally saying enough is enough. Fauci, whatever you want to say, my governor, whatever you want to try to do. I'm opening my business.
Yeah.
I am going to church.
The trade-offs it's always been a trade-off, but right. Now I think we're seeing that the trade-off is bad in favor. We've got to open up the businesses, the restaurants. There's this big, as we mentioned earlier, $1.9 trillion COVID relief / stimulus bill that isn't that, and we'll talk about that later. It's more of an excuse to spend money and give it to liberal constituencies. But all of this, let's look at the other side. Look at the free market side of this and let the businesses open. Reduce the restrictions on even the public facilities like restaurants and hotels and things like that. Let's get these things moving. It's actually moving back. And if the more it opens up, I think all the signs show that things will open up and, we'll get back to normal.
The one place I was willing to give them a little wiggle room is the hospitals, because the issue of if we get too many infections, you're going to go to the hospital. A percentage of people go to the hospital. The hospital cases spiked here recently, deaths were spiking and so forth, and it was overwhelming the system. So I understand if you're trying, and that was the reason for the original lockdown. We're going to do this to keep from overwhelming the hospital system. And we just came through. Those cases now are dropping significantly. That's really good news. So I'm willing to give them a little bit of room because you do have a system, a healthcare system that has to be able to continue functioning and not be overwhelmed. But as the numbers are dropping, I suspect you're going to find a lot of people will pass on the vaccine, will change some of their behavior back to normal and so forth, because it just looks like we're kind of past it.
Yeah. Let's take a call. We've got Todd in Texas who wants to talk about these restrictions that the federal government is trying to make, has to make. Todd, thanks for calling in.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Subject that you're currently speaking about, as far as the vaccines go, you might want to mention to the public and your listening audience that, legally speaking, by definition, is not a vaccine. That's been proven. And my opinion shouldn't be taken. But the reason I called was the subject you were speaking of.
You're just talking about you're not injecting the live virus into the person. So that's why you're
correct.
making that statement. Yeah.
It does not fit the legal definition of a vaccine.
Well,
therefore, you should not call it a vaccine.
Prior to the mRNA vaccines that we have now, they used either a live virus or a dead virus or a portion of that virus in order to stimulate the response. Both the Moderna and the Pfizer are messenger RNA, which take a completely different approach, and they don't use a part of the virus itself.
Correct.
Okay,
but
so what's your other point?
I wasn't calling for that particular thing. But the subject you were speaking of a while ago about the children making decisions on changing gender or taking drugs or whatnot, and they want to pass this as law in Congress. My point is, in my 52 years of living, I have yet to hear any media outlet mention that Congress can pass any law they want, but it does not apply in the 50 states. It cannot be enforced in the 50 states because it's outside their jurisdiction.
Yeah, there's parental rights that should trump that.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 clearly limits their jurisdiction to D.C. and its possessions and territories, other than what is outlined in the Constitution that they can do. And passing laws like that would apply in the 50 states is completely outside of that.
Todd, thanks for your call. You know what I do want to say about this, the Equality Act may or may not allow for the gender surgeries to take place or force it would force doctors to do them. But it's the way the regulations are written to implement the Equality Act if it's passed, or even just the way the regulations are written, period. And the Health and Human Services has so much power to write regulations having to do with the medical community. Yes. And, you know, we saw that with Obamacare. We saw that with the gender bathroom bills and things like that. So no matter whether the Equality Act passes or not, no matter whether Congress does anything to force gender changes to take place nationwide, it's the regs that start to pass, and that's why it's very important who's the HHS secretary and who's the assistant. The
bureaucrats can write the regulations, and they're getting very creative about making things happen because Congress gives the agencies a lot of power when they pass legislation. Affordable Care Act, huge legislation, with 1,427, I can't remember how many pages it had, but there was something like 3,000 references to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Commerce, and others. It just is simply saying the Secretary will do this, the Secretary shall find, the Secretary shall promulgate regulations, and so forth. They pass a lot of that power off to the agencies, and they can turn around and push a lot of that stuff on us.
That's true. Amen. Next up, we're going to kind of unpack a little bit this COVID relief bill. That's another vote that's going to take place. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the good outcome today, because the parliamentarian ruled that the minimum wage increased to $15 an hour cannot be part of this bill if they're going to vote on it under reconciliation,
Right.
which means that it only takes a majority to pass. So we'll unpack all of that. But I just want to go back to Russ Duthat's article. He says the danger of the overcautious wait for Christmas public rhetoric from Biden and Fauci is that it provides cover and encouragement for fearful officials to extend the whole suite of emergency measures for many unnecessary months. And he says that after a year of misery, death, and sacrifice, the public has a right to know in advance when the emergency should reasonably be over. And I just say amen to that. I think the public has a right to know. I think we figured out how to make good decisions for ourselves with regard to the pandemic. Certainly, there are lots of measures that can stay in place, but some of them have to go. Stay with us. We'll be back after this.
A $15 per hour minimum wage has been a dream of the left for a while now. Such an arbitrary number. Why not $50? Why not $100? If the goal is to lift people out of poverty, the higher the better, right? Not really. This kind of mandate will result in more people earning $0 an hour. Heritage Foundation President Kay James says government-imposed minimum wages are a bad idea to begin with. COVID-19 concerns and restrictions have resulted in tremendous economic devastation. Mrs. James warns a minimum wage increase could push many hard-hit businesses out of business. The federal minimum wage is now $7.25 an hour. A proposal to get it to $15 is part of the massive coronavirus relief bill being debated in Congress. The president really wants this, but he's facing opposition from key Senate moderates from his own party. These lawmakers don't want to further burden constituents already struggling to save their businesses and keep their jobs. No industry has been hit harder by COVID restrictions than the restaurant business. Business Insider reports that since the onset of the pandemic, 17% of U.S. restaurants have permanently shut down, about 110,000 establishments, and many more are struggling. The Heritage Foundation recently held an online forum for restaurant owners to explain their unique concerns about a federally mandated minimum wage increase. They explained that because servers and bartenders currently earn a very low minimum, employers are required to supply a tip credit in the event that tips don't get the employee to the minimum wage. The president's proposal eliminates that system, requiring that all employees be paid the federal minimum. Many establishments could not survive that. Servers would lose, as many customers would tip less or not at all. Restaurants operate on low margins. Owners say there's only so much you can raise your prices before you price yourself out of the market. Raising the minimum wage would harm those it's supposed to help. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. Let me take a call here. Shelby's in Georgia and has been waiting. Hi, Shelby. Thanks for calling in.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. One of the things about the allowing children to make these decisions isn't safe for them and their mental health, because Dr. James Dobson says that at certain points of their development, they have hormone washings, and if that doesn't happen, their mental ability to mature is going to be stunted.
Yes, that's another impact of it. I was shocked when I read Bringing Up Girls by Dr. Dobson. about that, the times in a little girl's life when she gets this massive blast of estrogen, and it does a lot for her, just apart from just her sexual characteristics. Thanks for bringing that up. Thank you, Shelby. We appreciate that call. Well, we did want to talk about the COVID relief bill, $1.9 trillion. The best stimulus would probably be, as we've just been discussing, a return to normalcy. But instead, this is, they're saying that 91 to 95% of it won't even be spent this year, number one. And number two, so much of it, and I have the percentage somewhere, I'll find it, doesn't even really have to do with relief from COVID or stimulating the economy. A lot of people have actually been holding on to their money and have more money in savings at this point. You're also seeing people starting to let go of their money and spend it right now because they're feeling a little bit more secure about it.
It's actually an interesting point. Consumer demand is up. The problem is supply. There are so many places where you can't get something because it takes the supply, and the supply chains have fallen. So I know a person who's been ordering furniture for some clients, and what might have normally taken 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they're saying, well, it'll probably be 5 months, 6 months before this stuff comes in. You have demand and people with income. You also have some people who were hurt badly financially, but you have some people with income. But the supply chain is completely upset right now.
It is. Both of my sons have been trying to buy mountain bikes since the beginning of COVID, and they haven't been able to buy one. It's just the parts and everything else. And the $1,400 per, or the $1,400 per household. There's no. There's an income limit, but there's not a discerning whether this family has jobs, and what their situation is. It's not targeted toward the real need. So that's another part of it. The idea of just sending out money to everyone in a certain income category. They did it at the beginning, but to do it again. It just seems, we're actually spending the next generation's
the initial
inheritance.
Bill, I don't know if they kept this in there, but the initial bill had some families with children could make up to $300,000 a year initially. And that's where Joe Biden said he would be willing to consider maybe reducing that level. And I don't know if they did that in the bill that the House passed, but best I can tell, $300,000 a year is not a low-income family.
No, and I mean, if you're making $300,000 a year and you get a check for $1,400, whoop-de-doo, right? I mean,
well, remember, Barack Obama used to say on his tax increases, we're going to ask the people who are well off, who are doing well, to pay a little more. And his definition of a single person making $200,000 or a family making $250,000 a year, that he wanted to raise taxes on, because he said you're doing really well out there. But under this, if you're making up to $300,000 in some cases, you could get stimulus money.
So Senator John Kennedy says of this, it's a grab bag of new socialist funding.
Yep.
Senator Ted Cruz, a Democratic wish list of spending. It doesn't really do much related to the shutdown. There's massive education spending in it, but it doesn't really require the reopening of schools.
City and state bailouts.
City and state, massive pension bailouts.
Even though a number of the states have actually doing quite well on their. Texas isn't doing quite as well as we had been, but we're doing better than we thought. But a number of states, the revenues are actually up. Now, they have some expenses. And so I think you could come up and say, well, a lot of the states are setting up these various vaccine centers and so forth, and there's a lot of expenses they're having to, so we're going to help them out. That would make a little bit of sense, but the revenues of most states are actually doing quite well.
Yes, and the small percentage of this $1.9 trillion that's legitimate. There's legitimate things that can be done, legitimate relief and all of that.
Unemployment goes from 300 to 400 a week, and so there are some things like that's meant to help people who have been hurt by this, and a fair number of people have been hurt badly by it.
Certainly,
and we don't want to ignore that or mitigate that concern at all.
You want to be careful about that, but that's what they've done is they've added, I think maybe $200 billion, $300 billion is sort of really hitting relief, and everything else is fluff.
It's Christmas time for the left. And, the part of this, I think it's one thing it neglects is things that would really make sense, like rapid testing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, rapid testing would be a real help, because if you could get a test every time you think you're going to go somewhere where, you might be a threat, if you had it, then, that's really, I think that would be a common sense
I would
solution.
be more supportive if the tests were really accurate, but they're only about 85% are accurate, and so you get a lot of false positives and false negatives with the rapid test. They're going to improve that, I think, soon, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, so really, it throws massive amounts of money at causes that are barely or really not related to the pandemic. And in a sense, some of the cities and states that you mentioned are, they've been mishandling their finances for decades, and overtaxing their citizens. And so to get bailed out by a COVID package is really not fair.
No, I mean, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think I forget who, I'll misquote him, but so I won't attribute the quote, but just know I'm not claiming this as my own. Anybody who robs Peter to pay Paul can always count on the support of Paul, right? I mean, that's always. And that's what this is. And it's not, and it's, as you alluded to, it's not, it's robbing future generations. We don't have this money. The nation is $28 trillion in debt.
Mm-hmm.
It is just a matter of time before, I mean, this is like the emperor has no clothes scenario when someone, say, maybe where that fable comes from, China, steps up and says, hey, they're no different than Greece. The only reason that, which would probably trigger a worldwide economic depression, but the only reason is because the dollar is the world reserve currency. Well, China would probably like to be the world's reserve currency. They're trying to be. Exactly. I mean, this is fiscally insane. I know people are hurting, and yes, it is noble to want to help them. Let them go back to work is the best way to help them, and you don't have to tack on another $2 trillion of monopoly money that we don't have.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, it just makes common sense. And I think there comes a tipping point. We passed it where you're doing more harm than good with the restrictions on the economy. And so, that's only common sense, and is something I think that we need to unpack issue by issue as time goes on. But, now, I mean, I think in a sense, we're living in a dangerous moment. And there are decisions that are going to be made that could affect the future, basically our children, irreparably. One of those is the schools and their education. But there's also a lot of damage being done to the economy and to our sort of our monetary policy. So all of this are issues that we continue to discuss here at Point of View, and we hope you'll stick with us. We've posted articles about all of the things that we've talked about today and more that you might want to read over the weekend. And we also just want to say God bless you. And thank you to everybody that helped us out. Thank you, Buddy. Thank you, Lathan, for being here for these discussions. And have a great weekend.
Have you seen the new book, In Defense of Looting? Yep, the author says that theft can be a really good thing. Oh, except for theft of the writer's intellectual property. There's a warning against that right inside the book. Steal from thee, not from me. NPR even did an interview with the author, helping spread this mental virus to countless others. Think of Point of View Radio as a vaccine against such things. When you support Kirby Anderson and the rest of the team, you're saying we need unchanging truth in these uncertain times. You're saying that right is right, wrong is wrong. You're providing an alternative to the distortions and outright lies of so many media sources in our day. Don't let fake news go unopposed. Join the Truth Team now by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Unchanging truth in uncertain times. Point of View Radio. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.